Hey guys, in this tutorial we are going to look at the @autowired and @service and @repository annotations of Spring and how Spring helps us create a layered structure. I'm just going to create a sort of a shell structure using these annotations, um, and all the code is going to be checked in GitHub. So we have been using the employee Spring repository for this, right? Um, so I like to have different packages for different layers. So let's create com incref employee dot service, all right, and we can have repository, all right. Um, so let's say there is a class called employee repository, and or we can just call it employee DAO also, and I'll just rename this to DAO. All right. DAO stands for data access objects. Does not matter. Basically, it's some class that helps you uh, get data from the database and convert it to Java objects and convert Java objects into database rows, right, and insert into database. So we can just annotate this using @repository. At this point in time, it does not matter much what we do with this. And also let's call create a new class called employee service. We can annotate this using @service. Okay, and let's have all the CRUD methods over here. So let's say public void add. All right, so for adding, then deleting, so sorry, delete, then get, and update. Okay, and now we need to be working in terms of our Java objects. So let's create a new package called Pojo, which stands for plain old Java object, and we can have a new class here called employee Pojo. Excuse me. We need to, okay, we can leave this as it is, and let's say it has three fields: private string name, private int id, and then private int age. And I need my getters and setters over here. All right, so our DAO layer is actually going to interact with database in the future. Setting that up is a bit complex. So I'm just going to simulate a database over here. So let's say private list, or actually let's create a hash map. Hash map integer, and then employee Pojo. So let's call this rows. Okay, and then corresponding to our four methods over here in our service, let's have four methods in the DAO layer. So let's say insert, delete, select, and update. This takes employee employee Pojo P. This takes an ID to delete. This selects an ID, and then maybe int ID and employee Pojo P. All right, and in insert we can just say rows dot put let's say Pojo dot sorry p dot get ID p. If you're deleting, we can just say rows dot remove ID. If you're just selecting one by ID, we can do return rows dot get ID. All right. We can also have method to return all Pojos. So list employee Pojo, select all, and we can do something like rows dot values. So we need to convert this into a list. So array list employee Pojo list equal to new array list, and then list dot add all rows dot values and return list. And again, if you want to update, uh, we can just say p dot put, correct? And we are just, oh sorry, so we are just updating uh, an existing or replacing an existing Pojo with a new Pojo. All right, so this is simulating our database, right? We will see how to use Hibernate here instead and get it persisted eventually in future tutorials. Now, if I have my employee service, so we can have employee Pojo P, right? If you're deleting, int ID get, all right, int ID here, and then int ID, and we are replacing this with some new Pojo. And maybe we have a method called get all. All right, now so we can have all our business logic here in this service. Now we want to use our DAO, whose basic function is just to do CRUD, right? It is not doing any business logic processing whatsoever, correct? So uh, ideally what would we would have done, oh, sorry, not ideally, um, sorry for the break, anyway, so traditionally what we would have done is that in our public employee service constructor, we would have done something like let's say private employee DAO, and in the constructor we would have done something like DAO equal to new employee DAO. Now I mean, so that we can use DAO, right? So we would have done something like DAO dot insert P, or DAO dot delete ID, or return DAO dot get or whatever select ID. Actually, let's just finish this and then I'll get along with the other things. So return DA dot select all, and here I can do DA dot update ID and new new Pojo, right? And so this works fine for small projects, but this same DAO may get used at multiple services, uh, and then I mean, like all of this initialization and tracking, how many instances of DAO exist. Um, I mean, like tracking and managing all of this becomes a huge nightmare. So Spring generally works on the concept of singletons. Singletons means if there is this service, there should be, I mean, we should be able to write code in such a way that there is only one object of this class that exists in the entire huge code base in the runtime, and then we should be able to use it anywhere, right? But then if you are trying to manage singletons, then you would need to write your own code to see if the class instance already exists, and if yes, then return it, um, or else uh, or else create a new one. And so all of that becomes very, very difficult. With Spring, it's very easy. You just say add auto wired, and that's it, and you don't need this constructor over here. All right, now if I have some other service, let's say employee service 2, maybe it does something else, right? So maybe it says uh, add add list, and we have list of employee Pojo, correct? So list, uh, again, not a great example, but just trying to illustrate over here. And so you can do something like for employee Pojo P in the list da dot insert pay, right? And so I don't need to worry about instantiating employee DAO. I don't need to worry about managing singletons. Using the at auto wired, Spring automatically creates an instance of it and then replaces this variable, or rather assigns this variable to that singleton object. Uh, and so that's the beauty of Spring, right? Again, Spring gives us certain functionalities. Now I use this hash map over here, but I didn't initialize it, so we'll get null pointer exception. So you can have a method called public void init, and you can have a method called add post construct, and I don't see it here. I don't know why. Let me have a look at this and get back to you. Okay, so the bug was that we need to include one more dependency over here. I just googled it up. JavaX annotation API. So actually, post construct is not a Spring uh, Spring sort of annotation. It's provided by Java. JavaX, I think, stands for Java Extended or something like that. But any which ways, so basically this method runs after the object is created, right? And so we can have rows equal to new hash map, correct? So let's look at our layering once again. We have our Pojo, we have our DAO, then our service consumes the DAO. All right. Uh, I'll just I'll just keep rename these things. Refactor. All right, one, and employee service, and then I can just call it 1, right? So we have our service layer, and now we can plug this in our API layer. So let's call this as employee controller. All right, and I mean, it's just an API, right? So so we can just use our different HTTP methods to represent different CRUD operations. So let's call this add. Then we can have a delete. Delete. We'll have to do some little bit of magic here and there. I'll show that to you in a moment. All right. Um, then I can have a get method int id, and I can have a get all method that doesn't use any id. Okay, so this should return list of user data. All right, this should just return user data, deletes it, and it adds a new one, and this doesn't return anything. Now we want to be able to use our employee service inside our controller. So again, add auto-wired private employee service, and we have our service. So we need our user Pojo equal to, let's say, convert user form. We'll be converting our form to our Pojo. Oh, sorry, it's employee Pojo. All right. And then we can do service dot add p. This method does not exist, so let's create this somewhere down the line, and it can be a static method. Then delete, we can do service dot delete id. Then we can have user date. So employee Pojo p equal to service dot get id, and we can have a method to convert it back user data. So let's say return convert p. Let's create another method for this, and we can have here list of employee Pojo list equal to service dot get all, then list of user data uh, list2 equal to new list, and then for every employee Pojo we can just add a converted user data, and finally we can return list2. All right, so this basically completes our controller layer. uh, let's also do one thing, rename our user data to employee data for being more readable, and user form to employee form. All right, and then we have our conversion method. So all right, so before we convert in the form we need private int id. Okay, let's do one thing. This time, let's automatically create a new ID. So all we need is name and age in our form, right? Typically the system will uh, create the IDs automatically. All right, and our employee data can simply extend employee form, and it can have the ID. All right, so it'll have ID, name, and age, all three, because it's extending employee form. All right. Um, Now, to be able to do this, we can also have, we need to increment the IDs. So now in our service layer, or let's say in our DO layer, we can have private int ID, or let's say last ID. And whenever we are inserting, we can do last ID plus plus, correct? So a new ID is automatically getting generated. We just ignore Pojo's ID, and we just say pojo.set ID as last ID. And so our database, like this layer is simulating automatically creating IDs. And in databases, they have auto increment feature, they have sequences which do this at the database layer itself, right? So now, yeah, now we can have our convert method, complete these methods. So static, if there is a Pojo, so we just say employee data d equal to new employee data, and then d dot set age from Pojo, and d dot set name from Pojo, and return d. Similarly, we need to convert form to Pojo. So we have employee form if sorry, employee Pojo is new, and then p dot set age, we can have we can set it from the form. Same for name, and we just call it F. So I think it more or less completes everything. Uh, and if you saw in my previous videos, I never completed the update method, correct? And so now let's do that also over here. So that would be a put method. Okay, so we need to get our ID, and then we need to get our employee form F. All right, and we can get the Pojo by converting the form, and I can say service dot update ID with this Pojo, and we don't need to basically return anything over here. So my update method is complete, and I'll just say updates an employee. This method gets list of all employees, this method gets an employee by ID. This method deletes an employee, and then this method adds an employee. All right. Now remember that when we were initially working in the previous tutorial, we were creating these objects from the JSON using the at request body Spring annotation, right? So it takes the JSON in the post body, HTTP post body, and converts this into this object. So after this, everything is Java based, right? No JSON. Now, where do I get this ID from? And so the the Spring framework allows us this request mapping annotation that comes from Spring allows us to implement a fully RESTful application. And so typically the way you do this is by saying that, by telling Spring that, hey, an ID is expected over here, and it's a path variable, right? It's a variable in the path, and I can just say at path variable ID. So by it'll name these things by by the name. It'll match these things by the name. Sorry, and if I do something like if I invoke a method like slash API slash one, and so Spring will automatically convert this one into this variable, and everything works over here, right? So similarly slash ID, then get all is okay, and we need slash ID over here, and we need to tell Spring to get that ID from the path variable, and the form update form will come as a request body JSON. uh, so a lot of work, a lot of learning, but trust me, I mean, like, Spring makes our life so much easy. uh, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when Spring wasn't there or wasn't mature enough, the same kind of code would have taken at least 3 times of more code to write, and wouldn't have been this readable, and would have been more or less a spaghetti code. So we have all our layers now, correct? Our data, then our sort of repository or data access layer. So data access, then service which implements a business logic, and then the controller that uses the business logic. I'm going to just show you what business logic really means, right? Excuse me. So let's say if I want to delete, and uh, before deleting, if this ID does not exist, then I want to throw an exception, right? So I mean, just to tell the user that this ID that you're trying to delete does not exist. So I can have a method like public employee Pojo get check int ID, and 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 so this equal to get ID, and if p equal to null, then through new um, let's say API exception, right? We're going to create our own exception. Employee with given ID does not exist. Sorry, ID is ID, right? So we're going to create this class also in the service layer. All right, and that's basically it. And from here we can just So needed to complete a few things in this code. Cool. And from here we can just throw this exception. um, and all right, and we can do this if you're trying to update also, correct? Because if you're trying to update something, the ID should exist, and we can do this while retrieving also. um, all right, so return p, and here I can just do, this is sort of resulting in a loop, so we can do dow dot select id, right? All right, so this is sort of a business logic, right? I can do other things also. So for example, uh, private static normalize, right? So let's say employee Pojo P, and let's say in my normalization I want to store all the names in lowercase. So p dot set name as p dot get name dot to lowercase dot, let's say I want to trim the value also, that is remove uh, uh, the white spaces, right? So I can also do something like normalize new Pojo, right? And p over here, right? So this is sort of the business logic. I mean, it can be anything for what we want. uh, just wanted to give you an example. So this completes our entire code. We are not using employee service one anywhere, just using this as an illustration. And now my controller will also throw exceptions. All right. um, I guess that's it. At least that's what I hope so. uh, just remember that Spring config scans all the classes in this package. So our Pojo, service, controller, DAO, all these classes will get scanned and properly initialized and auto-add. So we have covered more or less all the annotations over here. Add controller is used to serve HTML, which we can have a look in the next tutorial. And again, add transaction, enable transaction management, etc. We will use, we will learn these or use these when we do an actual implementation of the DO layer, where we are interacting with a real database as opposed to simulating it. All right, I'll just take a pause over here to see if everything works fine. If there are any bugs, I'll fix it and let you know. And if there are no bugs, then I'll show you a demo. Okay, so I found few minor bugs while converting our Pojo back to data. I wasn't setting the ID on the data on the Pojo, so added this. And here I had to modify my regex regular expression from this to this. Uh, Basically remove the slash over here so that it is matching uh, all my path patterns, including this one, because this does not have a trailing slash. All right, so let me give you a demo of this now. I'll check in this code. So we can go to our Swagger, and now you'll see the power of Swagger. I have all my get, post, delete methods. Uh, what these methods do is documented over here. It comes from these values from the at API operation Swagger annotation. So let's add something. Let's say age is 30 and name is Romil Jan. I try it out. I get a 200 response code, which is great. And now if I just want to um, get everything, so I get an array of employees. Let's post another one. Let's say Rajul Jain. Try it out. Then try this one out. So I'm getting all my employees, and notice how my ID is getting incremented because of this piece of code over here. Uh, let's try to get only one user, let's say with ID 2. So I get Rajul Jain. If I just put one over here, I get Romil Jain. Let's try to update Romil's age and name both, let's say 231. And the name is now new Romil Jain. All right. So I'll try it out. I get a response code of 200. And in my get, if I try it out now, I get the name is new Romil Jain. And new, notice how my business logic is also getting applied, right? The trailing space is removed, the name is converted into smaller case. And finally, let's delete Romil. I try it out and I do this and I get only Rajul as available. And finally, if I try to get now Romil with whose ID was 1, we have already deleted that user or employee. So I try it out and I get a forget about this entire exception. I mean, the exception gives the message employee I with given ID does not exist, which comes from our business logic, which was here, right? And there are better ways to deal with this because it's not a JSON response. We'll have a look at it in future. But I get a 500 internal error message. So guys, that completes our Spring tutorial for layering. In the next few tutorials, we will look at configuring Spring with properties file, time leaf, connecting with real database server, unit testing, and so on and so forth. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you.